Hello, this is Carrie Ann, and I have another video for you today, and I hope the audio is okay because I was having problems setting up the audio for this video. But what I want to talk to you today, if you can't tell, is we're going to talk about watercolor palettes, and I'm going to try to make sense of all this stuff. This is all sort of a lot of the various options that you have, and I'm going to show you how you can be a beginner and you can start with anything that I've shown here, and you can totally make sense of it, even if you've never used watercolor before. And I know that's a huge claim, but it's totally doable and it's totally easy to do. And there's a lot of people out there that tell you that if you're a beginner, you have to start with student watercolor half pan sets like this really nice Sakura Koi. I like the Sakura Koi, but say you wanted to start with something more vibrant, because a lot of these artist grade paints, they're not only more light fast, but they're also more vibrant in terms of the color. So what if you wanted to start with some Daniel Smith or a 48 set of Sennelier? Could you do that if you've never worked with watercolor before? Yes, you could, and I can totally show you how to do it, and I can totally make sense of all this stuff for you. So I'm going to take a break. I'm going to reorganize all of this, and I'm going to take all of this same information and I'm going to condense it into a way that's much easier to understand if you're a beginner, and that will make a lot more sense. All right, hopefully this is much better and this will sound pretty good. So what I have here is I went ahead and I trimmed down all the stuff that I had into just its basic components, to tell you how watercolor paints come when you go to the store and you buy some watercolor paints and you're not sure really what's what. So when you buy watercolor paint, student grade watercolor paint usually comes in predetermined sets, such as this, usually in plastic, but not always. And in these sets, you will get a lot of the same sort of general idea colors that we're going to talk about later, that you need. So usually it will come in a set, and what you will almost always get is you will almost always get a cool and a warm of each color, of each primary color. So you'll get a cool and a warm blue, cool and a warm yellow, and a cool and warm red. In addition to that, you'll likely get some greens and some earth tones. Sometimes you will get a black and a white, and there's some issues about black and white, and we'll go into more detail about black and white either later on in this video or in a different video. So that's usually what you will get if you get a predetermined student grade set. And that's typical, that's to be expected, that's fine. If you want to go ahead and buy your own artist grade tubes, however, you will get, oftentimes you can either get individual tubes like this is burnt sienna from Daniel Smith, or you can get tube sets like this, predetermined tube sets that will have either a theme. So this has a Pacific Northwest theme, and this is 5 tubes picked out by the company. And now the thing to keep in mind about these tube sets is that sometimes the tube sets will be the regular size. This is the regular full size that Mgram sells, 15 milliliter. Sometimes there will be slightly smaller size. I've seen sizes, 5 milliliters, 7 milliliters, any kind of sizes. This Daniel Smith was, I think, one of the first things that they've released in the smaller size and the new smaller size that you can now purchase them in. But I think at the time I don't think that they were yet selling the smaller sizes individually. They were only selling them in the packs. And that's also what you can get if you get artist grade paints. And so what you do with these tubes, hold on, before we start talking about artist grade paints, what you do with these tubes, like let's say you've gone to the store and you've picked out the tubes, you don't know what to do with them. You can put them in a plastic palette like the one that we saw earlier in the video, and not the one that you saw in detail in my protecting your paint tubes video. And I'll give you a link to that video up there. So that's something that you can do. Now, the other thing you can do is you can do something like this, where you can buy metal tins. So this came in a full metal tin, and then you can either buy separately or included. They'll come with these little half pan trays that, if you can see that some of these were pre-filled. So this was one that Sennelier actually did itself, and this is one that I filled myself, and you can see that the ones that I filled myself often don't look as neat or as clean as the ones that they did, but that's another way that you can do it for when you are buying your first watercolor set. If you want to, obviously I don't think that you would want to start with a set this big. There's a lot of reasons why, but the main is the price. These large sets of 48, the predetermined sets of 48, where the company has already filled the sets for you. I've only seen a handful that sell them, is the Schmincke and Sennelier, and they're both over $200. So So there's that. So this is that's something to keep in mind. But you can also put them in smaller sets, very similar to a set like this. This is a Sennelier set of 12. Now this is what I got. This was my very first travel set, and I think for this part of the show we're just going to talk about this set and this. And we're just going to talk about those two just for now. So this came the same thing as the other one, except that Sennelier only included one yellow in this set. And that's not typical. Usually you will get two yellows, but they did only give me one yellow. And I added a very warm, almost orange yellow. In addition to all these other colors, and this is also a color that I added. So this would be the kind of setup that you would get if you purchased an artist grade set, as well as something like a Daniel Smith. If you want to start and you want to start with Daniel Smith paints, this is essentially what I recommend that you get. This is the Daniel Smith Essential Set, and they will give you a cool and a warm yellow, cool and a warm red, cool and a warm blue. I suggest that you, if you want to start with artist grade materials, you don't know where to go, and you are in the US where this is relatively affordable. I think when I got it, I paid $22 for it, and maybe more, but that's what I paid for this set. I paid $22 and change for it. And in addition to that, I recommend you buying a tube of burnt sienna, either in the small or the large size when you get this set. If this is the way that you want to go and you want to start with the more expensive artist grade materials. Now, so what's the deal with artist grade materials anyway? So essentially, artist grade materials, they tend to differ from student grade materials in a number of ways. Number one way they differ is obviously the price. The reason for the price is the light fastness. The artist grade materials tend to be more light fast, which means that they will last longer when put on display. Student grade materials don't often have the same level of light fastness, and that usually comes from more expensive, more high-end, finely ground pigments. So, for example, however, it is to be noted that buying artist grade materials will not improve the quality of your art. It may make the experience of learning easier, but it's not necessarily going to improve your work. For example, both of these are equally subpar. And I think subpar is being a little bit generous. This is done with the Sennelier artist grade paints, and this is done with the Cotman student grade paints. And they're both equally, I'm going to say equally subpar if I'm going to be generous to myself. However, I did enjoy making both of these, and I had a lot of fun. I'm not going to lie and tell you I didn't enjoy this one a little bit more. I did enjoy making this one a little bit more. But that's the other thing that you may find is you may find that artist grade materials, because they are more pigmented, you may find yourself having an easier time with them. And that's the next thing I'm going to show you. And I'm going to show you that right here. This is the Daniel Smith mixing chart. And no, I'm going to pause for a second because I did something. Okay, so I have here the Daniel Smith mixing chart, and then I have here the Sakura Koi mixing chart, and you will notice instantly right away the higher vibrancy of the Daniel Smith colors. You get a lot of the same things with the Sakura Koi. You might just have to do more layers or things like that with the Sakura Koi. It's not necessarily, like I said, it's not going to make you a better artist if you use more expensive materials, but you can see from the higher vibrancy that some things might be a little bit easier. So for example, if you want to get really, really vibrant colors, it might be a little bit easier with the Daniel Smith colors, but it's not doable with the Sakura Koi. Once again, let me show you this other chart, and this is what we're going to be using more of, and we're going to be using this chart more, and you're going to be seeing this chart in pretty much all my watercolor paint reviews. As you can see here, if you can look at the chart, as you can see in this chart, this is the Daniel Smith and this is the Sakura Koi, and you can see the difference right away in the vibrancy as well as the way it goes from light to dark, and it does just a really nice, you can get really nice light tones, really nice mid tones, and then really nice sort of lighter tones with this, as well as you can see here the mixes are really clean on this. They're also clean on the Sakura Koi, but there's definitely a little bit something extra in the Daniel Smith mixes that I really like. So that's one of the reasons why people will move to artist grade materials is because of the increased vibrancy, but also because of the increased vibrancy, I do find myself using less when I'm using my artist grade materials versus my student grade materials. Otherwise, we're going to be treating them the same for the purposes of the rest of this lesson, which is I'm just going to be using both interchangeably, and then just showing you which one I have. So then the next lesson, the next part of this is, what's the point of this chart? What am I trying to illustrate here? And what I have here is, like I showed you before, these are the colors that you will typically see in your sets. You'll see a cool and a warm yellow. And don't worry if you don't know what a cool and a warm is. We're going to get to it. And by the time this is done, you'll be able to really have a better sense of it. So you get your cool and a warm yellow, your cool and a warm red, and your cool and warm blue. So these two blues right here were the blues that came in the set. You'll see that I added the burnt sienna. Why is it going to make your life a lot easier? Because one of the easiest way to make a really nice gray is to mix ultramarine, although I do sometimes do it with indanthrone blue, is to mix ultramarine with burnt sienna, and you get this really nice gray color. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's really nice. It's a really nice fun gray color that you can use to darken some of your other colors, except I wouldn't use it to darken yellow. I would use like an orange or something, but you can use that to darken some of your other colors without having them lose their luminosity or get sort of muddy or dull. That's sort of a neat trick. So having done that, I'm going to go back to the Sakura set. Like I said, I'm just going to be going back and forth with them just to show you that the general principles will be the same across whether or not you're using student and artist grades. So then why does it come with what you would consider maybe a more lemon yellow and a more orangey yellow, and the same with reds and the same with blues and greens? The reason is that it makes mixing colors a lot easier in many ways. There's another sort of, you can use cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. And I have said it in the past, Eves Bolt did a really good video on that. There'll be a link to that video in the description below. But I really enjoy using the dual primary because it makes my life so much easier for me. So let me show you. This is in fact the dual primary, because you have the three primary colors twice. You have 2 yellows, 2 blues, and 2 reds. That's what makes this a dual primary. So what's the deal with these colors, and why is it that sometimes people struggle to make, like, one of the colors that I've seen people struggle to make the most is a really nice purple and a really nice green? Super easy to do. What you do is, so I've arranged the colors in this way, and if you've seen my palettes are also arranged sort of in this order. And the way that I have them arranged is I start with the lemon yellow, or the more greenish yellow. We're just going to call it a greenish yellow, because I think it will make it easier to understand which yellow you use to mix with the blue, with which blue, to get a really nice clean green. So for example, with your greenish yellow, you mix that with your greenish blue, which is usually your phthalo blue. Let's see, in this one here, I'm just going to get the Daniel Smith back out, because it's going to be your phthalo blue in the Daniel Smith. And once again, you see that you mix that Hansel yellow light with this phthalo blue, and it gives you this really nice green. If you want to make a green that doesn't have as much of that, pine green, and it's a little bit less like super poppy green, then you would mix it with your ultramarine blue. Same here. If you want to have a really vibrant orange, you're going to mix it with your orangey red, which in this case is your Pyrrole Scarlet. And you're going to mix your orangey yellow with your orangey red. And the same thing here. If you want to make a really vibrant purple, you're going to mix your bluish, pinkish, purplish red with your more purplish, bluish, with your more purplish, reddish blue. And that's usually the French ultramarine. And in this case, your reddish, your purplish red is, it's a quinacridone rose. Other sets use quinacridone red, but in this set uses a quinacridone rose. And so you will mix that and you'll get a really nice purple. And if you do that, and once again, as before, if you want to get a less vibrant purple, then what you would do is you could mix either your phthalo green, your phthalo your phthalo blue with your orangey red, or what I would most likely do is take my purplish red and mix it with my more greenish blue. If I wanted to make a purple that was a little bit less clearly purple, that's one way to do it. And so that's why when I have my colors, I don't have when I have my colors, I put the colors that mix better together next to each other, and that's a good habit to get into. So for example, I have my, if I can try to move this a little closer, I have my Hansa Yellow Light next to my New Gamboge. Those are my two yellows. And next to my New Gamboge, I have my Pyro Scarlet, which is going to be the red that I'm going to mix these two to make a nice, really nice, clean orange. And the same thing here is I have my French Ultramarine next to, beside my Quin Rose, and that's what I'm going to use to make a nice clean purple. Now, since this palette actually already has a purple, then I actually have the purple in between there. But if I didn't want to use the purple for whatever reason, if I wanted to mix my own purple, or if I wanted to make, if I wanted to make this purple a little bluer, or if I wanted to make it a little redder, that makes it really easy for me to do. Same thing here. Now, show you that this is the way that they are set up, and this is the same way, the same thing here. When you see this chart here for the Sakura Koi, the same thing. These two are the ones I would mix, these two are the ones I would mix, and these two are the ones I would mix to get a clean purple, a clean green, and a clean orange. If I wanted to get something a little bit less clean, then I would do something a little bit slightly different. But it's the same thing throughout the sets that are, throughout the various artist grade and student grade sets. Let me show you some more that are done in a similar way. So these are similar, and you'll see throughout. Now, the Sennelier artist is really interesting because they did only give you one yellow. However, if you look at the yellow that they gave you a really middle of the road yellow, and yellow is I think yellow in terms of the primaries, yellows is probably the exception. I think even if I was doing a dual primary, I think you could totally do a dual primary with just one yellow. You'd get a middle of the road yellow, but I have always found to have better results if I have two blues and two reds. Yellows, maybe because I learned with the Sennelier artists, these are the ones I learned with. So I've already gotten myself accustomed to using only one yellow. So I don't always need two yellows in a dual primary, but I still have it set up as a dual primary because, you still have this orange. I think the orange might look a little bit more vibrant if it was a little bit more of a little bit more warmer yellow, and that's a warmer color. It looks more like it's been in the sun, that kind of thing. It looks more like a sunny color, so a more warmer yellow would be here. But for the sake of, to avoid confusion, I usually describe the colors for me with what it mixes with, as opposed to warm and cool, which is gets things a little bit confusing. But once again, as we saw with the other ones, I want to show you that ultramarine and that burnt sienna makes a really nice gray. Now, sometimes you'll have companies where they'll do a color and they'll call it burnt sienna and it'll be like PR 101. I dislike that immensely because it can mess with your mixing of your grays, and this is really how I mix my grays. This is why when you see people do reviews for watercolor paint sets, if a gray is included, a gray or a black, a lot of people really don't like that, because as you can see, you can make a pretty serviceable and a pretty nice gray or black this way. So there's other ways of doing it, but you don't really need a black in a set. If you have it, you can definitely use it. I do a lot of city colors. I do a lot of like plein air in the city. So for me, having a black is fine. It's perfect. It doesn't really bother me at all. And this one, I put a little bit too much pigment in here. That's why I did it here with a little bit less pigment. It was so much pigment that it actually ended up looking a little bit too dark. But once again, you can see here that I've done the same thing and that you've included the same thing. In this one, when I did the review of these paints, I did complain because I feel like they're basically two cool yellows. It's not truly a warm yellow. Like I wanted a warmer yellow. I understand that theoretically it's supposed to be a cool and a warm yellow, but they look so similar that you literally can't tell which one I use. So that was my complaint with this set. And it also came with a black too. So I was annoyed about that. Like I didn't get anything extra for my money. And this is another company, and I didn't do this because this isn't a burnt sienna. I think this is like a Venetian red, and this is like a yellow ochre. I didn't mark this up because I wasn't intending to go through all this right now. But if you're going to go to a store and you're going to buy these artist grade tubes, I figured I should show you how to read the label because it's super easy to read the label. One thing that you will get in almost all of these is they'll have a series number. And the reason that there's a series number is that for artist grade materials, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but for student grade materials, all the individual tubes and the individual pans, they'll all usually be the same price. For artist grade materials, the price will vary depending on the cost of the pigment. And almost all of these companies will tell you the pigment. So this is PBR7, and PBR stands for pigment brown 7. So each pigment has a color name and number. So pigment brown 7, and sometimes there'll be another name. For example, ivory black is PBK9, I think is ivory black, standing for pigment black 9. That's ivory black. So so they'll have this, and then they'll have the name, the company name of the color, as well as the blending solution. As I said, it's gum arabic to be watercolor, or if you are core, then you use Aquarell, but most of them use gum arabic. And then the solution is they'll add, honey or whatever. Standard Smith doesn't add some honey, but other companies will add honey, and they'll add various things to their vehicle solution. And then that's your ASTM, that sort of thing. So this is how you read the tube. It's just the name of the pigment, the company, and the size of it. So this should be pretty easy to do. You can go to the store, you can pick out the ones. Right here's your series. This will have your series. Like I said, different pigments will have different prices depending on the cost of the pigment. So this is a series 1. Burnt sienna is among the most affordable pigments. PBR7 is very affordable pigment. It's used in a lot of colors. So it's series 1, which is their least affordable ones. And then, they'll go up, and they also have light fast rating. This tube does. Some companies don't put the light fast rating on the tube, but Daniel Smith does put the light fast ratings on the tube. So with that said, we're going to pause, and then I will be right about why there are larger palettes, why I created a palette with 48 colors when you basically can use those 6 basic colors, and you can get a lot done with those 6 basic colors. And if you add burnt sienna, then that's pretty much all you need. So what's the point of all these additional colors? Why 48 colors? And what's with this color that has both a black and a white, even though you may have seen videos where people say they never use a black and white and they think black and white are horrible? What's the deal with me having both a black and a white and a palette and all these other things? Well, what you can do is you can create what they call convenience colors as well as custom palettes. Convenience colors are colors where you can use the color without having to do a bunch of mixing, and it gives you pretty much what you want. So for example, a good convenience color here is cerulean blue, which I can just use that for sky. I don't have to do anything to it. I just have a clean sky and I'm set. I don't have to do anything. I can use this yellow ochre or even the raw sienna, but probably the yellow ochre as a just a sand or something like that. And I have to do very little. This brown green here makes very nice sort of very nice desaturated green that I can use without a lot of effort. So that's one of the main reasons to make a palette with this many colors. A lot of people like to mix different colors and different triads. So having a large palette like this gives you a lot of options, but for various reasons we're going to talk about in a future video about why you really, especially when you're starting out, you don't want to use 48 colors in a piece. I said before that you should really limit yourself when you're starting out to, like, I would say a maximum of 4 or 5 colors in one piece when you're starting out. And then when you get better, then you can start doing other things. And then, you can do a lot of other things. I very much like to, with my palettes, when I make a palette, you saw before I talked about the pigments. I haven't talked about pigments all that much because we're going to talk about that more when I start doing the review. If you notice, earlier in the video, I didn't really tell you what to buy. One, because I don't really tell people what to buy, but also because we're going to go into more detail into that when we do the individual reviews. But the main thing that I want to show you, this is different than the 48 colors that come in the Sennelier 48 color set. I made some changes here. some of the changes. I think there's one color here that this was originally a different color. No, this one was originally a different color. Is I changed some of the colors because the color that was here originally is just a color that was too wet in the palette and didn't really dry. It's not really a huge issue, but if you use colors that have honey in them, like Sennelier and Mgram are the two biggest ones, you should keep in mind that some colors have a really hard time drying when you dry them and you put them in a palette. So for example, my Mgram palette, this is my Mgram palette that I made. The color terracotta is just never going to dry. In my experience, all the colors that I've tried with PR 101, they just have such a hard time staying dry unless they were colors that I purchased as a dry, as a dry pan, as a dry half pan. But putting it into a tube and trying to dry my PR 101 colors and using them after the fact has been a real pain, and I probably won't ever do that again from now on. If I want to use a PR 101 type color dry, then I will just buy it in the half pan and not stress myself out about whether or not it will bleed or whatever. That's something that we'll discuss later in more detail. But for right now, the main thing that I want to show you is I want to show you this mixing chart, as well as this mixing chart, which, hold on, to avoid, so I just want in more detail later. But the main thing that I want to show you for here is I want to show you this because these are two palettes that I made. Like I said, I made the Mgram terracotta to be able to travel with me, and I can't use it for that because this Mgram palette as a city palette to be able to travel, but I can't use it for that because this silly terracotta basically liquefied and didn't really dry out. But I can show you this one. So you'll see that this one and these two, they have a lot of really dark tones, a lot of muddy tones. For this one, a lot of people will say you don't want to use something with a lot of pigments. For this one, I just threw all that concern about pigments out the window because I use this one for when I'm out in New York City sketching. So I want those muddy colors. I want those desaturated colors. The reasons that people tell you not to use a black to darken your colors, that's not an issue for this palette because I want those sort of muddy, maybe even a little bit ugly colors. I don't want a perfect dark blue for this palette. I want a dark blue that looks a little messy. I want a dark green that looks a little messy because if you've ever been to New York City, all your colors look messy after a while. And that's also part of the reason why I added white. They say, if you want to use white, you just lighten, you just use less pigment. But these whites here, the colors that have been added with white, they give it a nice sort of pastel, opaque look. And that's the kind of look that I was going for. So when you start to add more colors, you can sort of have a little bit more control over not just what the colors are in your palette, but sort of a lot of the things that you can do easier, because you can always do these same things with just your base, the 6 colors that we talked about earlier, but this gives you a much easier time doing it. So that's really the main reason to have these larger palettes with all these extra colors, is for convenience and for ease. And one colors that you do tend to find a lot in these beginner palettes is a sap green or kind of olive green or some kind of green like that. You can easily mix a good green with phthalo blue and lemon yellow, but you still see it included in palettes a lot because it's a color that people tend to use a lot. But for some people who don't use green a lot, they won't include a convenience green in their palettes, and that's just a choice that you make. And there's so many videos about people making their own palettes and all sorts of other things, but I just wanted to go over that so we at least covered why some of these palettes will have 48 colors and they have all these large number of colors when you're first starting out, and why you might hear that you shouldn't necessarily go out and get these large colors. That's really basically why, is that that people have them for specific reasons. They're trying to do something with them. A lot of times people will just buy a general, like they'll buy the palette, the Schmincke makes for 48 colors or whatever. I passed on that palette because it had 2 whites. I definitely don't need 2 whites. 1 white I can understand, but I didn't need 2 whites. So that's really one of the main things that I wanted to talk about. So I hope that this really, really helps you out and helps you to understand just the very, very basics of the first watercolor palette that you might have, if you already have one, and this will sort of help you to better understand how to get the most use out of it. I strongly recommend that you make a mixing chart for your palette. They're pretty easy to do. You can do a half chart like this, or you can do a full chart. I've already done a video in the past about making a mixing chart with your palette. If you're just starting out, they can be extremely helpful to show you a lot of the things that you can do. And one of the things that makes watercolor a little bit different than like colored pencil or especially marker is that it's really easy to get. So for example, let me just show you a color. Just pick a color at random. So for example, no, that's too okay. So for example, like a dark purple like this, which is done with dioxazine purple and permanent alizarin crimson, is that you can have variations, and there's ways of making a sort of a variation chart so you can see what that's going to look like, where it has more purple and where it has more alizarin crimson. A color that might be better to illustrate that might be French ultramarine, and I don't have a burnt sienna, but I have a raw sienna, and a raw sienna gives me a kind of gray. Raw sepia gives me a kind of gray. Warm sepia also gives me a kind of gray. It's not as clean as I would get with a burnt sienna, but as I said earlier, I don't really need it for it to be as clean. So that's another color where you would do a chart that shows you all the way from all blue to all warm sepia, and that's another kind of chart that you can make. But oh boy, am I long-winded. But I hope that I covered all of this, and I hope that this was helpful to you if you already had a palette, or this is helpful to you as you sort of go in and decide what you want to do and where you want to go, what sorts of things you want to do. Now, over the coming weeks, I'm going to start doing, I'm going to aim for one watercolor review a week, and with the goal of eventually finishing all these reviews for the things that I've already made charts for. And then I can use the charts to compare them, because I found that to be one of the most helpful parts about my colored pencil reviews, is that I had all these charts, and it was really easy to compare brands and to show people like what you can do with the various brands and why various brands cause what they do. So that's going to be the main thing that I'm going to hopefully be able to do here with all these charts, is that this is all leading towards me doing these reviews, and I hope that you guys will enjoy the reviews as they start coming out. And the first one, I haven't decided what the first one is going to be, but the first one is probably going to be coming out next week, not this week, and then I'll try to do one a week or one every other week, and you'll see them fairly frequently, but at the same time, I want to try to remember for everybody that this is ultimately like this is a casual sort of beginner artist channel, and I don't want us to get too bogged down in too many different things. So I'm going to try to keep things the same way that I did my colored pencil reviews, being thorough, being detailed, and giving you samples of my work that I've done with various things, but at the same time not getting too bogged down in too many technicalities, in such a way that you may not necessarily need from me, that may be available out there. So a lot of things that so anyway, so long story short is that's going to be the nature of the reviews for the watercolor paints. I'm going to try to get them to be as similar to my colored pencil reviews as possible in terms of the thoroughness, the charts, all that other stuff that you guys have come to love. And I will try my best to have a completed coloring book page with the watercolor paints, just like I've been doing with the watercolor pencils. So I hope you guys will stay with me for those, and I hope that we have a lot of fun doing that. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Stay for the video of Bella refusing to thank the patrons. That wasn't very nice of her. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Hey Bella, are you gonna tell people to like and subscribe? Yes you are. Bellita. Bella Abuela. You gonna tell people to like and subscribe? Share the video? Thank the patrons? Oh, you're not gonna thank the patrons? Oh, that's cold, Bella. Oh, that's cold.